two major opinion polls published this week. Both showed there's been very little shift in public opinion despite the first 2 weeks of election campaigning. I'm joined now by William Bowe, election analyst and publisher of the Poll Bludger, and Ben Oquist, Executive Director of the Australia Institute. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Fran. Hi, William.
Hello. Ben, two major polls published this week. Neither showed much shift. Is that good news for Labor, which seemed to go, according to all the polls, into this election ahead? And it had a pretty rough start there from Anthony Albanese in its first week. How do you see those two polls?
Well, yes, if it stays at 53 or 55, as some polls have had it, two-party preferred to Labor, they'll win, notwithstanding there's a difficult seat count. It's not the national poll that counts, it's the counting up the 151 seats that counts, and they've got to get to 76, and they've got to win 7 seats from where they are, and most people are giving them a couple of seats in Western Australia, and I think Boothby looks good for them in South Australia, and maybe Reid and in New South Wales and Chisholm, and hope for them they'll be looking at Tasmania. But you see, just listing off those seats, you don't get to 7 quickly. But if the polls stay at anywhere near 53 or 4, then the seat count will be there for them. I think the danger is that in the past, elections have narrowed getting closer to polling day. And on the arithmetic, I think a lot of people think that the coalition can win with a 2PP for them of only 49 or 48.5. You remember John Howard won an election with the 49% of the 2PP. I think that will be the sniff that the coalition is hoping for. At 53%, then Labor would win a majority government. But if it narrows at all, then I think and there's some evidence suggests that it might on historical basis, then you'd think that a minority parliament probably is looking as likely as not at this stage in the election campaign.
OK. William, that's talking about the two-party preferred vote. There's been a lot of talk around lately about the primary votes because they look very low for both major parties and there doesn't seem to be much shift in them. I think Labor this week, Newspoll had them at 37%, Ipsos had them down at 34%, which is just a tad over their primary vote when they lost last time around. The Coalition's vote is low too. There is a slab of undecided, but it's not that big, I don't think. With such a low primary vote, how worried do you think the major parties would be about what Ben was saying there, a hung parliament, and how focused are they, do you think, on that primary vote? What are they wanting to see?
Well, as Ben says, if Labor are at 53-47, then the tide is going to be, high enough to raise their boats, so to speak. But most observers will be factoring in a narrowing. 53-47 win for Labor would be, up there with their historically best results ever, and it just doesn't feel like the environment is quite that strong for them. And traditionally, Labor especially, I think, tend to blow big opinion poll leads during campaigns to an extent. So the question is, if the two-party preferred does come down from 53-47 to perhaps sort of 51-49, then we are looking to see if those historically low major party primary votes start converting into a bigger crossbench. And, there are a lot of scenarios around where that can occur. The Liberals are under a lot of pressure from various independents around the place. And, when the two-party preferred, narrows to that point, then, you really are at a point where that mediocre primary vote for them both does mean that neither of them makes it over the line in seat terms.
Well, I can predict on the basis of past elections, we've all seen many of them, that in a week or two the focus is going to be very much on preference deals, because that's what we're talking about here when we talk about two-party preferred, preference votes. You've been looking, William, at the impact of One Nation and Clive Palmer's United Australia Party. What can you see about in terms of what their preferences may or may not decide?
Well, they're a bit unpredictable because there was a dramatic increase in the share of preferences that the coalition received from One Nation in 2019. And all of that anti-Labor advertising that Clive Palmer ran in 2019 really fed into a high flow of preferences from his party to the coalition. It's difficult to see that increasing much this time, but you just never know. That is a highly variable factor, and I think the sort of extent to which the Liberal Party are relaxed about seeing the Catherine Deves controversy play out I think that is part of a strategy to cultivate preference flows from, minor parties. They accept that they have lost a share of their vote to those parties, and the path to victory for them is getting those votes back as preferences. So, while that particular issue might not play well in the kinds of, affluent electorates where they're under pressure from independents, we're hearing a lot of talk from, via press gallery journalists, that what they're hearing from the Liberal camp is that we think that this issue is playing really well among the kind of voters that we're losing to Hanson and Palmer.
Ben, are you hearing that too? And are you seeing any sign from the Clive Palmer camp, UAP, what they might do? It was quite late in the campaign last election when Clive Palmer sort of brought out those ads non-stop, it would seem, against Bill Shorten and against Labor, which, Labor certainly believes carried a lot of momentum against them in those last couple of weeks. They haven't seen that from Clive Palmer yet. He's not acting like a friend of the government this time.
No, I think that advertising campaign and where he points that is more important than preferences. We've been tracking his vote for a little while and haven't had it outside that 2 to 4% range really. Actually stronger in Victoria than in Queensland, counterintuitively. But if you think about it, he is tapping into a genuine vote this time. I think last time it wasn't clear what his constituency was, but he's built it around an anti-vax and anti-lockdown movement, if you like. It's small, but it's real. So it's unclear where the preferences go, but I think it's important always to remember that it's the voters that decide the preferences in the end when they go into the ballot box and not the parties. And I think the voters' preferences for those parties, for One Nation and UAP, are particularly influenced by the current mood or the current trend. So if the coalition has a very good last week or two in the election campaign, they're likely to get a higher percentage of those preferences than they would have. But conversely, if it stays at about where it is, they'll probably get Labor will get enough of a share to win them. And while the primary vote is important, and everyone talks about needing to get to 40%, to somehow win a majority, it's not really critical. If you get those preferences, you can still win those seats. Anastasia Palaszczuk won the 2017 election with a primary vote of 35%, but the increased size of the crossbench and the difficult seat count that both sides make means that a hung parliament is more likely, given that we expect all the existing independents bar Craig Kelly to be elected, and you'd have to bet on current published polls that at least one or two of the independents, or potentially more, in either Sydney or Melbourne or even Curtin in Western Australia, where I'm told the ground game is looking good for the Teal independent there. Kate Chaney, no guarantee of a winning, but momentum on the ground there, I'm told. So you'd have to expect one of those to at least win. And with an expanded crossbench, just mathematically, the increases the likelihood of a hung parliament, regardless of primary vote.
William, just a quick observation from you. I wonder whether you think too that at least one of those Teal independents, if not more, and perhaps the Curtin candidate, is likely to get elected?
Well, they seem to all be very close races. And, the best guess is that one or two here and there might get up. I also wouldn't rule out there being a couple of rural independents who aren't being spoken of much winning.
Whereabouts?
The seat of Nichols in regional Victoria, where Damien Drum, the Nationals member, is retiring. There's the Hinkler in Queensland, Bundaberg. You've got the Mayor of Bundaberg, Jack Dempsey, is running there. He's a former state member. And these are sort of occurring a bit away from the glare. They're not getting as much publicity, these sorts of contests. I don't think these candidates are sort of existential threats for the government. I think we're talking about Conservative independents here who, assuming they are as competitive as I'm suggesting they might be.
Right.
They would back a Morrison government, but, it does, feed back into that sort of issue that we're talking about, that the lower the primary vote for the major parties gets, the more opportunities there are for these sorts of candidates to sneak through. The bigger the crossbench, the higher the likelihood of a hung parliament.
OK, let's come to the here and now. The story today, inflation. Wonder how that feeds into both sides, well, the end result of this campaign. Ben, I know the Australia Institute's been in the field testing the major messages of both Labor and the Coalition. What did your research find, and how do the inflation rates today fit into that?
Well, a couple of things. We've found that the economy is back in front as the most important issue in the election campaign. We also had a look at the messages of each side of politics and what tested best. Interestingly, it was the negative messages of each side about the other that tested best, and Labor's message about the Prime Minister being announcement and no delivery and follow-through tested well, and for the government, their negative message about Labor not being strong on the economy tested well. Labor's message tested marginally better for them than the government's negative on Albo tested. But I think the interest rate decision that's likely to come next week, I think the RBA will lift rates on Tuesday off the back of this high inflation numbers. Now, I think traditionally the idea is that the coalition does well when economics or economic management is being discussed, but I think it's more complicated than that. It's really the terms on which the economy is being discussed that counts. And the fact that Labor's been running a big cost of living campaign and has been running a big campaign about record low wage growth, this announcement today kind of plays into their frame, and certainly Jim Chalmers was making the most of that today. And I think, conversely, the Treasurer, I think, is a very good campaigner, a good performer, didn't look as confident as he usually does today. And I put that down to two things. One, massive inflation rise, and two, the issue we were talking about before. He's under massive pressure in his own seat. And the fact that he had to spend so much of his press conference today talking about his opponent in what is regarded as a blue ribbon Liberal seat tells you a lot. And I think the combination of those two things, the Treasurer being in a knife fight in his own seat and inflation on the rise and interest rates, my prediction is set to be raised by the RBA on Tuesday, makes it not as simple as to say that just because we're discussing the economy, it's good for the coalition.
Yeah, William, I'll get your view on that. I mean, Labor's slogan from the very beginning has been everything's going up except your wages, and here we have the inflation rate, and next week we might have the interest rate rise. So that would seem to fit into their slogan. But what do you think, if interest rates rise next week, which party do you think it benefits, or clearly we can see which party that's likely to benefit? The government, who's saying don't risk Labor at times like this, or Labor is saying look what they went and did?
I think on balance you'd have to say Labor, but I also think there is something in the notion that it will emphasise the Liberal Party's message that these are uncertain times, and the Liberals have a kind of built-in brand advantage on the economy. Compare that, for example, with 2007, where interest rates rose throughout the final term of the Howard government.
Including in the election campaign.
Indeed. That, however, directly ran against the line that Howard ran on in 2004, which, the entire focus of their campaign on that occasion was all about interest rates. We're the party to keep them low. After 3 years of failing to do that, they were judged on that. The Morrison government is not carrying the baggage of interest rates that directly because, the interest rates have been extremely low throughout the time of the Morrison government, and I think a lot of voters would regard the circumstance that are causing interest rates to rise as out of their control.
Ben, just finally, do you agree with that? Do you think it sort of underlines the government's risk message about Labor? Oh, rates are going up, everything's going up, we better stay where we are, or the other?
Well, I think that's what they're going to try and prosecute. And you saw the Prime Minister, he had his press conference this morning, but then held a kind of impromptu one late this afternoon with his candidate in the MP for Leichhardt, Warren Entsch, to directly try and turn the tables. I think on any normal metric would look like a bad announcement for the government, inflation rising well outside what was the mainstream prediction of how high it would be, and had to hold that impromptu press conference. And I come back to this wage growth issue. I saw Michelle O'Neill from the ACTU saying this afternoon that they had calculated that this effectively meant that workers had a $2,000 pay cut just in the first 6 months of this year, will have one as a result of this, and that's on top of an effective pay cut of $800 last year. And if that argument gets going, it turns the table on the kind of more abstract notions of economics into a more kitchen table economics. And I think it's that battle. Whoever wins that battle and turns the economic... If Morrison is able to keep it at a high level about economic management, he'll win. But if Labor can turn it into kitchen table economics, they'll win.
Well, I guess it all goes down to sentiment on the ground, really. What are people feeling? It's all very well to say wages growths are going up despite what the stats are saying, but what are people feeling? Before I let you go, William, you're on the ground in Perth. Do you have any direct mail on that seat that Ben was talking about earlier, the seat of Curtin, where there is an independent Kate Chaney running against the Liberal MP?
Oh, she's got significant ground game, I'll say that much. You know, there is clearly a corflute war going on in Curtin. And, you know, it's focusing a lot of attention. It's, you know, filling up a lot of the media coverage about the election in Western Australia. And it's certainly, you know, in the mix among those seats, the rest of which are all in Sydney and Melbourne. And from my perspective, I think it'll make for a very interesting election night. We won't be able to... I doubt the result will be settled before Western Australia's results start coming through. And both the size of the swing, which appears to be on in Western Australia, and that wild card of Curtin, I think are going to loom quite large on the night.
Well, I think there's a very big chance. Do you both agree we won't get a result on election night? Isn't something like 40% of the result going to be postal ballots or ballots that are going to be counted over the next days?
Yeah, well, the pre-poll period has shrunk slightly this election from last time, but there's no doubt that pre-poll figure is likely to be at 30%, and then there's postal. So in a close election, you might not know, but I wouldn't rule out having a result on election night. But I do think that we've got an interesting contest this time. Of course, all parties face battles on their kind of left and right flanks, but there are a number of more seats that are under threat from independents this time. So there could be long nights for many candidates.
Yeah, OK. All right. Well, I've shared those nights with both of you at different times, so thank you and good luck. And thank you, William. Thank you, Ben. Ben, since we spoke to you last time here on the program, you've been married. Got married. I'd like to say congratulations to you and good luck with that. I hope it's a wonderful, wonderful union. And thank you, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks, Fran. It was a lovely, lovely wedding on a lovely day.
Great.